And what you've seen in the bitterness and brutality, the nastiness of these elite struggles, is just an echo of what will come nationally everywhere as these different groups start to wage war upon one another for the spoils, and that is the end of liberal society. It
Well,
really is.
and it really is, and it's funny. It's perpetual too, right? So because you can always reverse the demand, right? So for years there were demands for like in arts for colorblind casting. Like, of course you can have a black Hamlet. Of course you can have a a Latino in a Shakespearean play playing Othello if you want, or and you could change the work slightly to accommodate and acknowledge that in your stage production or not. But then Juilliard has this freak out in the opposite direction, which is, students rallied against colorblind casting, saying, you're forcing me to hide and submerge my black racial identity behind white characters. And that in itself is a kind of white supremacy. And you're right, it's an
The
abandonment
art
of,
itself has to disappear because it can't. We
well,
can't allow it to have that freedom. It has to become a vehicle for ideology. And that's that. When you read reviews, I mean, there's so many awful reviews written by all these millennials pumping out every film has to be judged entirely on, well, there weren't enough people that identity in it, or it wasn't black enough, it wasn't white enough. That's it. That's the review. Or they offended someone. Like the fact that In the Heights, which I don't know, I haven't seen, but the fact that it's defined entirely by that squabble, as opposed to seeing it as an artistic
right.
whole, seems to me to be reduce it to ideology in a way that art should inherently uh, make more complex rather than more simple.
Well, and that's, that is one of the tragedies, right, of this last 30 years is that, when I felt when I was young that a lot of people who were progressives of a certain caste who kind of had this longing for a utopia that can never be, and who themselves maybe don't have faith in God, they could turn to the arts and to high culture for that sense of catharsis, that and uh, the feeling that they themselves and their longings and passions could be understood and ordered into something beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. Now now no one goes to catechism, and so they're trying to make the movies into catechesis lessons, which sucks. Which means bad movies. Like,
I know, and God knows how many of them there are. I mean, these asinine comic book
oh
movies
my
that
god.
I can't even begin to. It might as well go on
Well,
a fucking Disney ride. But it seems, but that's what will appeal to. That's the only thing that can get through to people, or will translate into mass sales in China, which is, of course, where Hollywood is currently directing most of its concern.
but that brings up an interesting question, which is, one thing I've always thought, like, I always try to think of a baleful social trend. Well, how would this end? Right. So, like with the trans kid stuff, which I don't mean to bring up another subject, I thought, okay, that's going to end in a lawsuit, right? That some, 19-year-old man is going to say, hey, I was a kid. You could have told me I would be a unicorn and I would have believed you. And you gave me the surgery, and now I'll never be a father. I've lost my sexuality. Give me 9 figures and a judgment. And then the insurance companies will tell the hospitals and the therapists, no more, no more on minors. And with CRT, I've wondered, does this end with, and I don't welcome this as a as a dove, does this end with conflict with China, which is an immeasurably more racist, chauvinistic society than the West and than the United States? And which a conflict with the Chinese Communist Party for the future of the world, I think if people became conscious of it as their politics, I think it would uh, suddenly the virtues of America's Republican inheritance uh, the actual existing diversity that we not only tolerate but encourage the expression of, I don't know, would suddenly the value would suddenly be there for people. Like
One
it's,
would hope so, but there seems to be an absolute blind, because the doctrine argues that racism entirely a Western construct, was entirely created by white people in the West, which I know you laugh because it is absolutely historically and culturally and civilizationally absurd to make that argument. And when you have a country like China, which is overwhelmed, not just Chinese, but Han, in which anybody even slightly different than a Han has no chance whatsoever, let alone the ethnic minorities, which are under siege and in one case being wiped out systematically. That is, you're right. I mean, if you think about that as the alternative to what the West is, which is this effectively an incredibly successful attempt to keep such a diverse place actually on the road, actually keep going and finding a way to keep it not breaking down into racial and ethnic warfare. But that requires a defense of liberalism